Next we'll be introducing Casey Gustowarow. Is that right? Gustowarow. He's a Virginia vegetable farmer, currently finishing out the growing season at Potomac Vegetable Farms. Next year he will be shaking things up at the farm at Sunnyside.
Woohoo! All right. I think I can start here. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Michelle, for organizing this and everyone else involved. It truly is an honor to be here, for sure. I am a young farmer. There are so many other more experienced farmers in the region, and it truly is an honor to be here talking today to all of you folks. So I do work right now at Potomac Vegetable Farms. I'm kind of like a roving chef in some ways too. I'm a roaming farmer. I was at Sunnyside before in Rappahannock County, Virginia. Kind of learned a few things there, and then I moved on to Potomac Vegetable Farms. Potomac Vegetable Farms has been in business about 50 years. They started in a lot of the original farmers markets. There's actually 2 farms. One is in Vienna. I manage a farm with my wife out in Purcellville, Loudoun County, so only about 45 miles from here. We go to farmers markets. We have a 500, 600 member CSA. We have roadside stands, so a lot of vegetable outlets. And what I've learned there most is what I'm going to talk about now a bit and what I was asked to talk about is kind of soil management as a farmer and how that correlates to the food that we produce. I'm also going to talk a little bit about diversity and the things that we grow. I am predominantly a veggie farmer. I'll talk mainly about that. There are so many other farmers in this region doing wonderful, amazing things in the realms of livestock and orchards and things like that. I'm going to talk about vegetables and the soil that we cultivate in that realm. And then I'll talk just a little bit about kind of what I think as a farmer, how we can cultivate relationships with chefs and vice versa. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So here we go. So when I think about soil as a farmer, I think about 3 different kind of properties. I think about the physical properties of a soil. Is it a sandy field? Is it a field filled with clay or more clay soil? And those are all things that I'm thinking about, and all of these are interrelated. The physicality of the soil, the chemistry, and the biology. And we as farmers have to kind of think about all those things, and the food that comes out of that soil is related to all those properties. So I never want to go into soil. If it's a heavy clay soil, I never want to till a soil that's going to be wet, and then that will actually damage the soil for decades potentially. So certain things grow great in the sand. I want to get in early to those fields because they're going to dry out. They're not going to hold as much moisture. And then there are other things. A clay soil has its benefits too. It holds more nutrients. So kind of there are lots of different things that I'm thinking about timing wise of when I put a certain crop into a certain field and how it's going to do. Then I also think about the chemistry of the soil. What is actually in that soil. Going back to high school chemistry class, it's not just though what a lot of conventional farms will only look at those major nutrients, the NPK, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium. But we kind of look at more things, and thinking about it as someone that is ingesting food, we need lots of different things to build our immunity and against diseases. We need lots of different types of foods and different nutrients from different realms. Plants are the same way. If you are not feeding your soil and only feeding the plant, then your plants potentially are not healthy. So I'm thinking not only about those major nutrients. If you go to a garden store, you're getting a fertilizer, you look on the packet, it has 3 different numbers. Those are only the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium. But we're thinking about we're looking, every year we're taking samples of the soil and we're looking at lots of different things in the soil. The calcium and magnesium ratio, and those are things that make sense and take into account we have to take those into account, and that changes kind of the physical parameters of the soil. If you have a proper calcium to magnesium ratio, then the soil will actually have more tilth and fluffiness. So it's something that takes a long time to actually balance your soil, and a lot of people are now talking more and more about nutrient-dense food. I'm not sure if many of you have heard of that term, but a lot of that goes back to the chemistry of the soil. And if your soil is balanced, then your plants are going to grow healthy. They're going to be able to fend off diseases and pests, and all of that goes back to what the soil is giving that plant. And what I'm going to mainly talk about, though, is kind of biology in the soil, and that's something as a farmer who uses organic practices is really mostly dealing with. You know, these other things we're thinking about a lot, but the biology in the soil is what is able to make our plants really do well. So things that we do, or that I do on my farm, or the farm that I work at now, is we make a lot of compost. So I'm going to pass out some samples here. Feel free to open them. Pass them around. You can smell it. You can touch it. So kind of on an organic farm, this is one of the most important things that I think about, is inoculating soil with life, rather than going in and spraying chemicals to deplete the weeds or deplete the pests, but adding life that the microbes within that compost that you're adding to your soil actually enable the plants to be healthy, to fend off disease, to have a stronger immunity. And that's why it's so important for me to make this compost on farm. So what we do is we take these raw products of basically, so this is myself turning a 25-ton pile of what was at one point dairy manure, straw mulch or hay mulch, and leaf litter. So we get all of these products we do get products from off the farm. We grow vegetables on about 10 acres. If I took all my vegetable matter or anything that I had left over, it would make about less than 1% of that pile. So we do have to import things from off the farm to make this compost. But we are importing it from local sources, and that takes it's a 2-month process. Does anyone make compost at home? Yeah. And I think that's wonderful, but this is a very different process in some respect. I make compost, at my house too. I have my little thing that I put all my kitchen scraps in, and it gets kind of funky sometimes. But it's a carefully monitored process. It actually gets up to 150 degrees. So that's killing any weed seeds, any disease that's in there. It's a process that does, as Eric was saying, lots of this work that we're doing, it's hard. It takes a long time. This is something that is turned every day for about 2 months, pulling on and off these covers that keep the soil or the compost at the right temperature and the right moisture. But within a week, this parent material that we've put in there, the manure, the hay, the leaves, and some clay, you can't even tell what it's from or what it started as, and it's already transforming into this biologically active, microbe-filled product, and that's something that then feeds our plants. One thing that's incredibly important to me as a farmer is dealing with planting cover crops. Has anyone heard of cover crops? Can anyone give me any idea of what a cover crop does?
it helps you get nutrients that you have taken out from the plants you grow back into the soil.
Exactly. That's a major thing. Anything else?
Prevents erosion.
Yep, prevents erosion. Those are probably two of the major things that I'm thinking about. It's covering the soil. It's forming a blanket on the soil. When I don't have a crop of tomatoes or cabbage or broccoli or peppers, whatever I'm growing as my cash crop, I try at all times to have a cover crop on that field. It's covering, it's preventing erosion, it's adding, we're tilling it back in the soil. Instead of taking something, continually taking things out of the soil, we're adding organic matter back into the soil. It's adding more food for those microbes that I've just inoculated the soil with my compost. Does anyone have any idea what cover crops are? What would be an example of a cover crop?
Buckwheat.
Okay, buckwheat, yes. So something you always hear about buckwheat honey. You know, that's the bees are out foraging the buckwheat, but you can also make buckwheat pancakes. It's a grain. That's a very common one that I use a lot in the summer. Anyone else? Soybean, yep. That can be something that is harvested, but it's also something that I use as a cover crop. So there are lots of things that we think of as crops in a larger sense, but as a vegetable farmer, I think of them differently. I think of them as something that's covering the soil. So that buckwheat, it's offering nectar to bees, to other pollinators, it's offering habitat for beneficial insects that are then going to help my cash crop close by. That maybe I've got a pest in my cash crop, and meaning something that I'm growing, tomatoes, I've got a pest in there. Maybe there's some type of parasitic wasp that's living in the buckwheat that then goes over and parasitizes my pest in the tomatoes, and then I'm getting a better crop of tomatoes. So it's thinking about all of those relationships that are happening on our farm, thinking about a farm as a whole system. But there are other crops, so the buckwheat is offering that. It's also mining phosphorus in the soil and making that available for the next crop. Another thing that I didn't really talk about, but grasses are an incredibly important part of the cover crop realm. It can be sorghum Sudan grass is something that I grow in the summer. You see me there, it gets 8 feet tall. We're cutting that and basically tilling that back in the soil. All those little pieces are then food for the microbes, and they're building organic matter in the soil, which enables your soil to be more fluffy. It enables it to hold more water. So when you have these big storm events that we keep on having, all your soil isn't running off, and it actually holds that water for the next crop. Alfalfa is another one that fixes nitrogen, just like soybeans. I don't use much of alfalfa, but it certainly could be used. And what I've been doing more and more is mixing all of these species together, trying to figure out a good mix of something that's providing lots of different functions. So you've got a grass that's fixing, or that's adding all of this organic matter to the soil. Then I have a soybean or a cowpea that's fixing nitrogen from the air that's then available for my next crop. And then I've got buckwheat that's providing habitat for pollinators and other beneficial insects. Or there's another one that I've been using a lot in the fall, a daikon radish. It's called a tillage radish that goes deep into the soil and relieves compaction that I maybe drove over a piece of ground when it was too wet. So lots of different things, and just spreading that idea of biodiversity on the farm I think is really important. So going into that, kind of talking about rotation, that what might happen on a vegetable farm. We are lucky to have a luxury of land. This doesn't always happen on a lot of small farms. You know, maybe there's a little tiny parcel that's only 3 acres, and they're growing as much stuff as they can and trying to pump it out. We grow on about 20 acres, so I feel lucky in that respect that I can have land to spare to put cover crop on. So this, starting at the top left there, is my young tomato crop. So I'd plant that, say, the first week of May, and I'd harvest, let it grow and harvest, and it will probably be tilled into the ground, say, September, mid-September to late September. Then I'm going to plant rye and vetch, let's say. The vetch fixes nitrogen, the rye grows really tall and is all that organic matter that I talked about. Then, so I'm planting that in the fall. It stays there through the winter, covers the ground. And then in the spring, we're going to mow it and till it back in the soil, feed the microbes again. Then I'm going to plant another crop down below on the right-hand side. That's sorghum Sudan grass, sun hemp, buckwheat, and crimson clover. Again, going that idea of spreading biodiversity in your cover crop mix. And I'm going to till that in. And then in the fall, I'm going to plant something here on the left-hand side. This is oats and peas and radishes. All have their own kind of purpose. Tilling into the soil, adding more organic matter, and food for the bees. And then that's going to die over the winter, and then I have a pretty clean field to plant my brassicas in the spring. Brassicas being cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, kale, all in that family. So we've gone a full year and cycle, or even a little more, and we've got 5 different crops. Only 2 of those are actually what we're going to harvest. I think that's something that a lot of farmers haven't made that leap of putting all that time and effort into growing all these cover crops. But I've found over my short duration here, as a farmer, and what I want to continue to do is, if we give land time to rest and regenerate itself, that the production that we get out of that land is much better. Plant food is able to be healthier, bigger, more nutritious. I grow organically, and I've heard this numerous times, oh, your food can't be organic because it's so big. But it's not, that's not, an organic farm shouldn't be thought of in that way. If we are dealing with soil correctly, and we are nourishing our crops, then we are nourishing the people that eat them. So another thing, going back to this idea of biodiversity, within our fields, within our cover crops, we're growing plenty of vegetables and different varieties, but also outside of the boundaries of our fields. I think for me, I come from kind of an environmental biology conservation background, and I think we, as farmers, have a role to play in spreading or regenerating land that's beyond our agricultural fields. Unfortunately, right now, the monocropping that is going on throughout most of the United States is tearing out habitat. There's corn and soybeans, fence row to fence row. You go to the Midwest, and that is a big problem. Everyone now is finally talking about monarchs and the plight of monarchs and and the plight of bees and all the pollinator issues. I feel like as an organic farmer, sustainable farmer, whatever you want to call it, we do have a role and a responsibility to play in managing land beyond our fields. And so one thing that I've tried to do slowly but surely is incorporate small areas of habitat for these pollinators. This right here is a mix of 20 different wildflowers and native grasses along the edge of my field. So that's hopefully not only providing habitat for pollinators, but also for beneficial insects, as I talked before, going over into our veggies and parasitizing those pests that we may have issues with. And then we don't have to spray, we don't have to use these chemicals to deal with pests. This is a picture on the right-hand side of the farm at Sunnyside where I'm moving to. They've put in about 50 acres of native grassland and meadows, which I think is amazing, and one of the reasons that I'm incredibly excited to move there and work there in a place where conservation can be at a juxtaposition with agriculture. So kind of talking, I was also asked a little bit to talk about diversity within the things that we grow. So I love diversity. I love to grow plenty of different things. As you see right there, I've got 3 different types of cauliflower on the table, which is one of my favorite fall time treats. I've got some hot peppers, which are definitely my favorite thing to grow. You can pass these around too. Feel free to take some. I've got a little glut right now. There's not that many people love hot peppers as much as me. So there are some in there that have kind of Southwest origins. There's ones in there that have Peruvian origins. There are ones in there that are very popular in Puerto Rican cuisine. So I think that's kind of one of the fun things about being a farmer. You know, you go to the grocery store and you see those red beets, and you see one type of cabbage, and you see this or that. But going to a farmer's market and being a farmer, you can grow tons of different things. I'll pass around these too.
Do the cauliflower have different textures and flavors?
They do, yeah, for sure. Some things I can't tell the difference myself. So these are some seed catalogs I'm passing around. Feel free to look at them. I think that's something that chefs don't always understand, or the public in general, that there are so many varieties that we have. This is kind of in my circle of farm friends, we call it winter porn, the farm porn, that we get to look at all these seed catalogs and plan for the next year. It is incredibly fun. You could feel free to kind of piece through or peel through the pages and look at all the variety that is there. I think that's something that's really great as a farmer. You get to look at, but as a chef, you could use that to your advantage of knowing that there is all this diversity and getting people excited about it. And it's not available all throughout the year. There are certain times that it peaks, and that is something that you can use to change your menus and make it interesting. You know, we grow 20 types of hot peppers and 30 types of tomatoes and 8 types of radish, a lot of things that people haven't really heard of. And I think that is what makes our farm and a lot of small farms viable, because sometimes things do happen with a certain crop. This year, for instance, and a lot of farms in the region it's harder and harder to grow tomatoes around the mid-Atlantic. Growing organically, we're getting more and more of a disease called late blight. So, but I don't plant just tomatoes. I don't plant 5 acres of tomatoes and then only rely on that, even though they're an amazing crop and people love them. But I'm planting lots of other types of things, and then if that goes down, then I've got something else to rely on.
I have a question about harvesting the tomatoes. Big field of tomatoes, you can hand harvest them?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, our farm is still small on the scale of lots of other farms. Most of the work that we do is by hand. I mean, we have tractors to till. Yeah, there's a lot of tomatoes to harvest. But you know, we definitely use tractors to till the ground and to prep the soil. But harvesting is generally something that's done by our farm workers.
I also have a question.
Yep.
What percentage of your production goes to waste, if any?
I feel incredibly lucky about this because the business that I work for has been around for so long that we have all these avenues. So we go to 7 farmers markets a week. We have a 550 member CSA, and we have 2 roadside stands. So we are lucky that maybe 2 or 3% I feel like goes to waste. It's very small, but I don't think that's the case for a lot of farms in this area or anywhere. And I think that's where working with chefs can, you know, if a relationship is cultivated with a farmer and we have seconds of something and you can use them right away, or trying to talk to farmers about what is in excess at that current point. I think there's a lot of room to use some of that. Talking about varieties, I think something, a big buzzword is kind of heirloom varieties or open pollinated varieties, and people talk about heirloom tomatoes, but I don't think most people really know what that means. What could someone give me a definition of heirloom varieties or heirloom seeds? What does that mean?
Old fashioned, or the original types, and
Okay.
they've been crossbred.
Exactly, yeah. So they've kind of been a lot of times passed down through the generations. They're true, they breed true. So you plant a tomato, say I've got this striped German tomato, a beautiful tomato that is absolutely delicious. And I take the seeds from that tomato that I've grown out, as long as it's not too close to any other tomatoes and there hasn't been too much crossbreeding. If I plant that seed out, then I'll get the same thing next time. And I think that's wonderful. I think seeds like that have a story a lot of times, and they have that culture that follows them, but they don't always make sense for farms to grow. So I think they have a lot of place to continue that heritage and to be grown in people's gardens, and sometimes it makes sense to grow them in mass. I mean, certain varieties that are heirloom make sense. We grow lots of heirloom tomatoes. But just for instance, something that I tried 5 years ago or so, I tried to grow this squash. It's called Crostata romanesco. It's a beautiful zucchini that has a really deep, nutty flavor. It's striped, it's wonderful, but its production is absolutely horrible. We'd go, plant 50 plants, and we'd get maybe 10 pounds a day. Squash harvest or something, if you've ever planted squash, they just pump it out. And then we planted this a few years ago. I found a variety that looked pretty similar, not quite as unique. Has a good taste too. It's called Green Tiger. It's beautiful, it tastes good. It produces probably 10 times the amount. So it is a hybrid variety, and I don't want to go too much into it's not GMO, but there are plant breeders that are doing lots of great work in continuing to breed these hybrid varieties, but there's also place for these heirloom and open pollinated varieties, and I think there are, but there's not that many people doing it in this region per se. There's one company I know in Southern Virginia that's working on some of these open pollinated varieties. And unfortunately, a lot of large companies like Monsanto are buying up a lot of other seed companies, and everything's getting consolidated. So for me as a farmer, I worry about some of these varieties that I used to grow, which are hybrid varieties, are now owned by Monsanto. And what do I do in that sense? I try not to support them, but it seems like we're getting pushed out there. So that's something that a lot of people I don't think are really talking about, and something that we as farmers and the general public need to learn a little bit about. All right, my last thing, Michelle asked me to kind of just talk a little bit about what I think chefs should know in kind of a relationship with a farm or farmer. I think for me, one of the most simple things is your taste buds are your test of a good farmer in many respects. If you use your taste buds and just taste the food that's coming out, and if you can prepare it simply and it still tastes good, then that is the sign that soil is managed properly. It's not always the case, but I think you can use that to be a good test. And I know, as Michelle said, chefs are busy, farmers are busy, everyone's busy, but I think it makes sense if we want to continue with this movement to make those relationships happen, have chefs visit markets and have the few chefs that I do work with, some of them have come to the farm, and I'm more than happy to go take them around and see what's going on. And have them ask questions about, well, why are you doing this and what's growing here? And I feel like before I started farming, I didn't know what a sweet potato plant necessarily looked like, or an okra plant. It's simple things, but I think that makes a big difference in kind of that more intense connection between restaurants and farmers. And just seeing if that farm really reflects the values that you want to have in your restaurant. Are workers treated fairly? Are are they taking care of the soil? Do the plants look like crap? I mean, they're just things that you can tell and have a conversation with the farmer. Something I talked about before, and where lots of people in the general public are talking about this more and more, but seriously buying into seasonality and diversity. Realize that some weeks we may have a glut of something and it may not be there the next week. And recognizing that as small farms, it's not the same as buying from Cisco. Things are not going to be there week after week, and they're not going to be available all the time. But there is that wealth of diversity, and if you can use that diversity to your advantage on your menu and change it up every once in a while. I'm not saying you have to change your whole menu every week, but if there's a local plate special, I mean, when I go to a restaurant, I know I'm a farmer and I'm looking for that, but if there's a local plate special, then I'm going to ask about it and what is in there, and it changes week to week, and this week we have an interesting Asian green that I've never heard of, and maybe I'll try that. I mean, I've seen it at the farmer's market. People now buy watermelon radishes when they didn't before because chefs are serving them in their restaurant, and people want this funky Romanesco cauliflower, and they want kale because I think chefs and other people are talking about it. So I do think that makes a difference for you and for us. I think there is an important point to work with farms that want to work with you. Me personally, I love, like I said before, I love foods. I think there is some inspiration that I get from people that are excited about my food, but our business, all in all, we have a lot of outlets for things, and so we're not necessarily always interested, but there are other farms that are just starting out. They're not in the markets that they want to be in, and maybe they're really interested in working with chefs and can come and make it. If it's something that's already on their schedule, then they're going to want to do that. So, but I wouldn't say, I've had chefs come up to me at the market and buy a thing or two, and then they're like, oh, well, can I get a deal on this or a wholesale? I mean, if money is the first thing that always comes up, then that's not something that turns me on very much. So yeah, just developing a relationship with people and making sure that the farm actually wants to work with you and you want to work with it, and realize that it's harder. It's going to take more time in some respect, but you can charge a premium, I think, for that food, and then you are doing, I think that food often tastes better. Just talking about that, there is a new thing online that just came in the region. It's called Farmer Chef Express. It's an online website that's supported by the Piedmont Environmental Council that I just heard about. You can go there and search out it's kind of this networking site. So I think there may be some flyers about that somewhere. Okay, I think that's all. I've taken more than my time, but if you have, I will do questions at the end, so thank you.